Have you ever felt like you had to walk on eggshells around someone? A boss, a client, maybe even a parent. Someone whose moods could turn a peaceful room into a battlefield where you constantly weigh every word, every movement, just to avoid triggering the next storm. Now imagine that same pressure amplified 1,000 times, not just your job or reputation at risk, but your very life. Your family, everything you know and love, balanced on the edge of one person's unpredictability. This wasn't a movie, it wasn't a dystopian novel. It was real life for one of the wisest men to ever walk the earth. A man whose legacy of calm, virtue, and reason still shapes lives 2,000 years later. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, and his daily test was surviving the explosive rage of the most dangerous man in Rome, a man he had personally helped raise. Imagine mentoring someone you hope will become a philosopher king, only to watch them become a monster. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a slow, brutal unraveling of ideals, values, and hope itself. As author Ryan Holiday puts it, Nero wasn't just a bad boss, he was a monster with limitless power, and Seneca had to stare into that monster's eyes every single day. This is more than a historical account. This is the ultimate test of Stoicism. Not in books, not in theory, but in blood, fear, and impossible decisions. It's what happens when wisdom meets absolute power. Can it tame it? Can it survive it? And when all influence is lost, when you realize the person holding the sword is the one you sharpened, how do you face your end with dignity? Today, we're not here to admire Stoic theory. We're here to see how it behaves under fire. This story is a battlefield of ideas, of restraint, of virtue in the face of madness. And it holds timeless lessons for anyone who's ever had to face a toxic boss, a power-hungry leader, or even the darker impulses within themselves. Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse. Let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward peace and wisdom. If you're on your own journey to reclaim your inner power, hit like and subscribe now, because what you're about to learn might just change the way you face every challenge in your life. Because this is a masterclass in Stoicism, forged in the fire of tyranny. Number 1. The Philosopher King's Hope. When Lucius Annaeus Seneca was summoned back to Rome in 49 AD, he wasn't returning as a victim of exile. He was returning with a mission, one so grand, so laden with philosophical hope that it echoed the dreams of Plato himself. His task? To shape a 12-year-old boy into the kind of leader philosophers had only dared to imagine, a ruler who governed not with fear or vanity, but with reason, justice, and moral virtue. That boy's name was Nero. Seneca saw this as his chance to bring Stoic principles out of the pages of books and into the beating heart of an empire. He wasn't just teaching rhetoric or governance, he was planting seeds of self-control and ethical responsibility, all in the mind of a future emperor. It was, at its core, a philosophical experiment with the highest possible stakes. Seneca approached this with the foundational concept of Stoicism, the dichotomy of control. The understanding that while we can't control outcomes or others' choices, we can control our own actions, words, and values. He couldn't control who Nero would become, but he could model what virtue looked like, not through speeches, but through behavior, through calm in chaos, through clarity in deception. According to Epictetus, who deeply admired Seneca's life and teachings, do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happen the way it does, and you will be calm. That's exactly how Seneca lived. He didn't fight Nero's nature. He shaped himself into a living example, hoping that the boy would follow. This wasn't blind optimism. It was the highest form of Stoic discipline, trusting the process while letting go of the outcome. Seneca's influence became especially clear when he wrote De Clementia, on mercy, a work addressed directly to Nero. not as flattery, but as a heartfelt plea to embrace mercy as strength. He argued that true power was not shown by crushing enemies, but by rising above them with grace. Seneca wrote, "No wild animal is harder to manage or more in need of skillful handling than man, and none more deserving of mercy." This wasn't just philosophy. It was political resistance wrapped in ethical persuasion. For a while, it worked. The first 5 years of Nero's rule, known as the Quinquennium Neronis, were considered remarkably stable and just. Historians largely credit this to Seneca and the general Burrus, who acted as moral anchors during Nero's formative years. But here's the timeless takeaway: you don't need a throne to lead. Simon Sinek, modern leadership expert, echoes this Stoic truth. You can't force someone to trust you. You can only behave in ways that make you trustworthy. Seneca understood this long before leadership became a science. He didn't seek control. He became a circle of safety, a presence of wisdom in a court full of predators. He was not the king, but the mirror that reflected what the king could be. This is your lesson today. In toxic workplaces, in families full of drama, in relationships where ego dominates, you start with you. You become the calm in the storm. You don't try to sculpt someone else's soul. You tend to your own. And maybe, just maybe, that light will be enough to show others a different path. Seneca placed a bet that philosophy, when lived sincerely and patiently, could soften even the hardest heart. For a brief moment in history, that bet seemed to pay off. Number 2, the first cracks. Power corrupts. But absolute power, it doesn't just corrupt, it accelerates what's already broken beneath the surface. After 5 years of relative stability under Seneca's mentorship, Nero's darker instincts began to rise. Insecurity, vanity, and cruelty, traits once suppressed, began to seep through the cracks, and those cracks soon became fractures. The moment everything changed was unthinkable. In 59 AD, Nero orchestrated the murder of his own mother, Agrippina. It wasn't just a power move. It was a warning to anyone who believed they could restrain him, including Seneca. That act sent a chilling message. The student was no longer listening to the teacher. From this point on, Seneca's role shifted. He was no longer guiding a prince toward virtue. He was now buffering the world from a tyrant, and he knew that meant playing a dangerous, delicate game. Every word could be misinterpreted, every silence fatal. The very wisdom that had once shaped Nero's early reign was now his lifeline for survival. This is where a deeper layer of Stoicism took center stage, the concept of preferred indifference. To the Stoics, only virtue and vice are truly good or bad. Everything else, wealth, health, power, even survival, is neutral. However, among those neutral things, some are naturally preferred. We'd all rather be healthy than sick, rich than poor, praised than hated. But the Stoic must be ready to surrender those preferences if they threaten integrity. As William Burvine explains, Stoics pursue things like wealth and reputation, but always with a reserve clause. They will pursue them only so long as doing so doesn't cost them their virtue. That's exactly the tightrope Seneca walked. He stayed near Nero, not because he craved power, but because he feared what unchecked madness could unleash without him there. His immense wealth and influence, both technically indifference, were tools he used to try and shield Rome from collapse. But that came at a cost. He had to justify what couldn't be justified. He had to remain silent in the face of growing horror. He became a lightning rod for the empire's decay, absorbing the voltage in hopes that others wouldn't have to. And here's where Heraclitus, the pre-Stoic philosopher of paradox, offers context. Heraclitus said, "The way up and the way down are one and the same." For Seneca, the path that once led upward, toward influence, toward the dream of a just Rome, was now pulling him down. He was caught in a spiral of compromise and internal conflict, but he stayed, not out of cowardice, out of calculated restraint. So what does this mean for you? Maybe you're not advising an emperor, but maybe you are dealing with a toxic boss. Maybe you're stuck in a system where speaking up costs too much. Or you're balancing survival in a relationship that's slowly wearing down your sense of self. This chapter of Seneca's life isn't about surrender. It's about strategic endurance, about choosing the lesser evil for a time, while keeping your compass pointed toward virtue. Your career title, your salary, your followers, those are preferred indifference. They can be useful, yes, but they're not your identity. Your core, your virtue, is where your strength lives. When the people around you spiral into irrationality, hold your ground. Be the quiet sanity, be the calm strategist, and know that integrity is a long game. Seneca didn't save Nero, but he tried. And sometimes that effort, that refusal to abandon your values, even in a compromised role, is the most stoic act of all. Number 3, the strategic withdrawal. There comes a moment, quiet, unmistakable and heavy, when staying becomes more dangerous than leaving. When presence is no longer influence, but complicity. For Lucius Annaeus Seneca, that moment came in the aftermath of Rome's most infamous tragedy, the Great Fire of 64 AD. The city burned. People whispered that Nero had ordered it. Others claimed he merely watched from his palace rooftop, strumming his lyre while screams filled the air. Whatever the truth, what followed was undeniable: brutal persecution, scapegoating, and a descent into unchecked tyranny. Seneca saw what was happening, and more importantly, he saw what he had become. His reputation, once a beacon of wisdom, was now a mask Nero used to give legitimacy to madness. It was no longer about protecting the empire. It was about surviving a regime that had grown beyond reason. So he did something radical, not by Roman standards, but by Stoic ones. He chose to walk away. Seneca approached Nero and asked permission to retire from public life. He offered to give back his wealth, his status, everything. Not as a performance, but as an act of clarity, of self-liberation. His integrity was more valuable than his empire. This is what Jocko Willink, the American Navy SEAL and Stoic-minded leader, would call extreme ownership, the ability to take full responsibility for your presence in a situation, even if that responsibility means removing yourself from it entirely. Seneca didn't leave in anger. He left in awareness. In control, he stopped attending court. He ceased offering advice. He faded into a quiet life of study and writing, exchanging marble halls for inner stillness. As Massimo Pigliucci reminds us, Stoics are not doormats. If a situation is toxic and you can change it or leave it, the virtuous action is to do so. And that's the line so many people struggle with today. We're conditioned to persist, to never quit, to always push forward. But Stoicism, real Stoicism, doesn't confuse stubbornness with courage. It asks a deeper question. Is my continued effort still serving virtue, or is it just feeding ego or fear? Seneca knew the answer. His departure wasn't weakness, it was precision. His exit was a message. I will not be a symbol for something I no longer believe in. This moment speaks directly to modern life. Maybe you're in a job that once made sense, but now violates your values. Maybe a partnership once full of potential now drains your energy and integrity. Maybe you're stuck in a mission that's no longer yours. Walking away doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it's the most powerful action you can take. The moment you choose peace over validation, clarity over confusion, dignity over approval. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, experienced something similar. Before discovering philosophy, he lost everything in a shipwreck. And yet that loss became the foundation of his transformation. Zeno of Citium once said, Well-being is attained little by little, yet it is no small thing. Seneca's retreat was not resignation. It was the reclaiming of his true identity. He understood that no title, no palace, no salary could ever compare to the treasure of inner sovereignty. In a world that demands you stay, fight, grind, and burn out, Seneca teaches you this. Sometimes the wisest move is stepping out of the fire, not in fear, but in full command of who you are and what you stand for. Number 4, the final lesson, dignity at the end. What do you do when the sword finally reaches your neck and the hand holding it is the very one you once tried to guide? For Lucius Annaeus Seneca, the answer didn't come in the form of resistance or rage. It came as calm, as composure, as one final unshakable expression of Stoic mastery. By 65 AD, Nero's paranoia had turned rabid. After uncovering the Pisonian conspiracy, a real plot to assassinate him, Nero seized the opportunity to eliminate anyone he saw as a threat. Seneca, though not proven guilty, was condemned, not by trial, but by command. A death sentence delivered through the Roman tradition of forced suicide. Imagine it. A soldier arrives at your door. You're told your time is up. No defense, no negotiation, no appeal, just the end. But Seneca didn't flinch. Decades of writing about virtue, impermanence, and mortality had prepared him for this moment. He didn't face death as a tragedy. He embraced it as the ultimate test. This wasn't philosophy as metaphor. This was real. Marcus Aurelius, who would rule a century later, once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." Seneca had truly lived, and now he would teach with his death. He turned to his wife, Paulina, and his grieving friends. Rather than fall apart, he comforted them. He reminded them of the lessons they had studied. He urged them to live virtuously and without fear. When Paulina begged to die alongside him, he didn't romanticize her pain. He advised against it. Even in his final breath, he was more concerned with reason than drama. This was amor fati in its purest form, the love of fate. Not just acceptance of what is, but the full embrace of it. This was memento mori, no longer as a meditation, but as a lived reality. Seneca had no control over Nero's decree, but he had absolute control over how he would respond to it. And that is the core of Stoicism. The external world is chaos, but within us, there can be peace if we train for it. A few centuries earlier, Socrates had modeled the same truth. Sentenced to death by his city for corrupting the youth and challenging authority, he drank poison in calm defiance of fear. Socrates said, "The hour of departure has arrived and we go our ways, I to die and you to live. Which is better, only God knows." Seneca lived in that same spirit. He didn't leave a monument. He didn't write a final book. He left something more powerful, an example. He showed us that a true Stoic doesn't crumble when the world turns on him. He becomes unshakable. James Stockdale, a US Navy pilot who survived over 7 years of torture in a Vietnamese prison camp, turned to the teachings of Epictetus during his darkest moments. He later wrote about the one thing his captors could never take, his will. James Stockdale said, "Stoicism is about recognizing what we can control and what we can't, and then having the courage to face the first and the wisdom to accept the second." That's exactly what Seneca did. His final act wasn't loud, it wasn't desperate. It was measured, calm, fully human, fully sovereign. He couldn't control how or when his life would end, but he could decide the manner in which he'd meet it. And in doing so, he became more than a philosopher. He became a guidepost for all of us, facing our own smaller deaths every day. Losses, endings, betrayals, and failures. We may never face an emperor's wrath, but we all face moments when everything feels out of our hands. Seneca's legacy is this: Even when everything is taken from you, your job, your name, your time, your character is still yours, and no one can touch it without your permission. Seneca's story isn't just the fall of a philosopher tangled in the web of power. It's something far deeper. It's a mirror, a guide, a manual on how to hold onto your soul when everything around you tempts you to lose it. From hopeful beginnings to bitter ends, Seneca left behind not just writings, but actions that speak louder than any quote ever could. He lived and died, proving that virtue isn't theoretical. It's practical, it's urgent, it's everything. Let's take a final look at the lessons forged in that fire. First, the art of positive influence. When faced with difficult people, don't try to control them. Start with your own behavior. Be the example of patience, reason, and discipline you wish others would follow. You may not change them, but you will remain unchanged yourself. Second, navigating toxicity with integrity. Remember the Stoic principle of preferred indifference. Status, titles, reputation, these are useful but never essential. What matters is your character. If keeping your position costs you your peace or your soul, then it's not worth the price. Third, the courage of strategic withdrawal. Sometimes staying isn't strength, it's stubbornness. Virtue demands that we know when to fight and when to leave. There's no glory in staying in a burning house when your presence only fuels the fire. Step back, reclaim your sovereignty, and finally, dignity in the face of the end. Whether it's the literal end of life or the symbolic death of a dream, a job, a chapter, we all face moments we can't control, but we always control how we show up for them. And that is where real power lives. Seneca showed us that we don't have to defeat tyrants to be victorious. Sometimes victory is found in not letting the tyrant live inside you. And maybe that's the ultimate Stoic insight, that while the world can take away your comfort, your security, and even your future, your inner fortress is yours alone. So let me ask you this. Which of these 4 lessons from Seneca hit home for you the most? Have you ever tried to influence someone who refused to change? Stayed in a toxic situation because you thought you had to? Or maybe walked away from something that no longer served you? Drop your story in the comments, because your journey may be the lifeline someone else needs right now. If this video resonated with you, if it stirred something in you, please give it a like and consider sharing it with a friend who may be going through their own Nero. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the Stoic Lighthouse and turn on notifications. Our mission is to be your guide when the world goes dark, because next time we're diving into a story that will shake you to your core. In our next episode, we'll uncover the story of a man who endured years of brutal captivity, and how ancient Stoic wisdom gave him the strength to not only survive, but emerge stronger. What he did will change the way you understand pain, resilience, and the human spirit. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, Lucius Annaeus Seneca once wrote, "It's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult. So dare. Dare to live by your principles. Dare to become the master of your own soul. Dare to be unshakable." See you in the next video.